All right, this is part 2 of lesson 3, rapid application development, formatting data for display. All right. So we're back from a brief break. Let's take a look at this. So you've got this format specifier code. So you're converting it. Again, I'm casting it to string. As an example, I've taken my my quantity integer and I'm multiplying by my price decimal, and I'm putting it into my extended price text box into a string, right? But I'm converting it, but I want to format that output, right? So how do I do that when I send it out to my text box? Because remember, what I'm saying is I'm sending it out, and the toString method also has this format specifier option or argument that you can put in. In this case, I've put in a C. Okay, so C means currency, right? So it'll actually put in a $sign and a comma separating each group of numerals depending on how big the number is, right? And again, if $sign is only relative to my settings in Visual Studio for where I exist. So $sign is where we are here. If I was in the UK, it'd be a pound. In Europe, it would be the euro, and so on. It would change according to my settings, right? N for number, right? So I want to change it, comma separating each group again, but with no currency symbol in the front, right? I can also specify a number of precision digits. So C0. So I want no digits of precision, right? I chop off those extra digits, even if it's a decimal. And I may want to do that. I might want 2. I want to format my string output when it goes out to the form controls. And here are all the popular ones. Okay, C or C. Again, please use one or the other. Please don't mix them up. If you're going to use capitals throughout. Keep your stuff consistent. Inconsistency looks ugly, right? It is ugly, actually. N or N formats with commas, 2 decimal spaces, and a minus sign at the left for negative values, right? So all these different things give you options. P for percent, right? Makes sense. These are different identifiers, they're same identifiers for across.net, as an example. Yeah?
For example, using the currency like for our first assignment, when you said to have a different language like in Spain, would it be possible to flip the currency as well, or is it just always stuck on one regional setting?
The answer is, right, you need to check. I don't want to tell you. It's part of that's a very interesting thing that you came up with. And I'm glad you asked the question, because you know what? Other people haven't asked that for assignment number 1. So the question is, I've asked you to switch to Spanish or something else. Should your currency change as well as a requirement? And it's the first time I've been asked that question. Okay, remember, you guys are coming up and asking me questions. And the answer is yes. It should switch currency, theoretically. How do you do such a thing? And my answer is, I want you to look it up. I want you to find out. Part of assignment number 1, it's not a difficult assignment. It's a very straightforward one. I want you to use your Google Foo, right? And I want you to be like, these masters of Foo, right, out there, and figure out how to do stuff that I won't tell you how to do, right, within the framework that I'm presenting to you, okay? So now, this isn't, somewhere in your assignment it might say, don't use more than 10% of someone else's code, or 25%, or whatever it says. This isn't someone else's code. This is actually looking up help on MSDN, right? So, does that answer your question?
No, but yes.
Good. All right. Anyone else have any questions around currency? I'm glad that you know, though. Okay. So format specifier code examples. Here they are. Again, a pin integer. So I have a pin 1, 2, 3, and then I use the code D6. Right? What would I use D6? What does the 6 mean? Right? It means up to 6 characters. Right? And then rate decimal, 0.075, 7.50%, right? And so on. And you can continue to specify, different kinds of specifier codes according to what they're going to output to you. As an example, -10. Okay. Date-time formatting is the same. If you have a date that you're going to timestamp your application with, and by the way, there might be cases where your client has asked you to create a log, right? As an example, your program is actually creating a log that you're saving, and you want to do a date stamp. How would you do that? It's very common, actually. How do you do that? Well, you have to use you have to format the date time values, because date time, remember, is a data type in C#, right? And you have to format them. How do you do that? Well, here are the date time values that you would use. And the date codes are all case sensitive. So a D compared to a small d compared to a capital D, lowercase d compared to a capital D is different, right? So please be cognizant of that when you do any kind of date time conversions. I haven't asked you for such a thing in assignment number 1, but some of you may want to be smart and put some stuff like that in future assignments. Just be wary that you need to use these formatting codes, or else it'll turn out like gobbledygook numbers. Okay. So let's take a look at a program example that we can look at together. So here's our planning sketch. Why am I showing you this planning sketch? Because you need to do it in assignment number 1. So imagine if this would be your assignment, right? So your planning sketch tells me where all your buttons and controls are and what they're called. This is an example, a very poor one, by the way, of a planning sketch, right? So if we were to break, let's take a brief pause on how to do this. And if I was to bring up a planning tool on my own, again, and I have mine under the design section of my, on the Mac there, I'm going to use Balsamic for my mock-ups. All right, you can use any kind of, again, open source tool. And I'm going to drag in a window, and I can choose common controls and so on. If I don't have, I'm not going to obviously create a browser type of app, right? But let's say, for example, I want to use some kind of box or container. So I click on containers. Here's a window dialog, right? Here's my window. I can name it. I can put on different controls. I choose not to. I can also go to buttons. I can drag in a regular button in here and start the process of creating my mock-up, all right? So again, you can make this as complex or as easy as you want. I'm using Balsamic when I create my mock-ups or my sketches. There are a lot of other programs out there that do it, some of them that I've given you for free that are web-based, HTML5 enabled and so on. However you do it, you've got to create your form, and then you've got to create your labels on your form, right? So if I start creating labels, I've got to put a label here that points to the button and tells me, as an example, what the button is and what it's called and so on, right? So any questions around this? Because I know some people are still really confused about, and I keep getting these emails about, well, I'm not an artist, Tom, kind of thing. What do you expect from me when it comes to this, kind of thing, right? And to me, again, I always point to what makes common sense, right? So when I'm talking about creating buttons, I want you to start labeling your controls as you make them, as you plan. I want you to start doing this kind of stuff. Add your arrows, add the different things. Export this document as an example to another document, whether it's Dreamweaver, Fireworks or Photoshop or whatever you're using. If you need to go there. You can also export this, whether different controls, different kinds of programs allow you to export them to PDF files and so on, and then combine them with your other PDF files, all kinds of stuff. I'm going to leave it to you, but one of your requirements is a sketch. And again, you could, if you want to, you can do it on. If you're not in the digital age somehow, as programmers, and you want to take a picture of your napkin, you can do that too. Yes.
No, just when you say you guys could probably use sketch.
You what?
By hand. I'm the guy who's going to do it by hand, probably.
By hand. That's fine. By hand is good. I'm okay. And you can also do it on the blackboard. Here's another way. We have lots of these whiteboards everywhere at school, even blackboards some places in school, and you feel like drawing it up on the blackboard because it's easier for you and taking a picture, I would accept that. As long as you incorporate it into your document, I'm good. Okay? Because in reality, sometimes we do these pictures in meetings, right? So I do a sketch in a meeting, and then what happens is I might get a rough document. I eventually would ask you to convert it to something like a sketch, like an actual sketch that's customer friendly. But I'm not going to tell you that I've never gotten a sketch that comes off a picture from a blackboard or even some kind of paper we've all drawn on. Okay? So that's perfectly acceptable as well. Let's just exit here. Again, it's just an aside, just to remind you that there are other ways of doing this kind of document. Okay, so you've got your sketch, and from here, you know, what do we got? We got a set of instructions. So a book sale form, that's the actual form itself. The name property, the text property, the accept button, the cancel button, all these properties, right, are going to be assigned. And if I look at my object, so let's go back up to one level here. So here's my form, and it's book sales, right? Now, luckily, I'm just going to close all this stuff off here as I'm working in Visual Studio. Oops. And no, I'm also going to open up Lesson 3, book sale, just to follow along, right? So what does it look like? Here's the completed solution, right? So here's your book sale. So I put together these forms. And one of the things that it's saying in the form is, and again, we talked about this last week, is look, I've got this accept button as the calculate button. I don't know why it flashed like that. I apologize for these technical difficulties in advance, gentlemen and lady. But yes, so you have this property of the form. I click on the form, I get this property that's accept button. This is a default button that I can use. Again, remember, I can press enter, and it'll actually access this calculate button on my enter key, right? And that's what this is asking for here in my properties. So if I go back to my properties, here it is. It says my accept button is my calculate button, and that's what it means. My cancel button is my clear button, and I have to define these buttons, obviously. And again, here will be the positions roughly of my buttons, right? So if I was going to create this form together with you, right, this is what I would do. I would put the buttons on, right? And as I'm putting them on, I would label them exactly what it says here. So if I'm building an assignment, I want you to label your buttons just like this. Give your arrows and everything else into your assignment, right? So here it is. I know some of you are saying, Tom, you said this to me before. How much more times are you going to talk about the sketch? Because in times past, where I've presented assignment requirements to students, they said, I don't know how to do a sketch, and I don't know what you need. So I'm telling you again, this is what I need. It's recorded on the video too, for proof. Because sometimes, for whatever reason, you're not going to do this, you don't think it's important, or you don't have time because you're rushing and doing your assignment at the last minute, and you're saying, well, I couldn't get this done, but my assignment works. Okay? And how much is a sketch worth anyway? It's probably worth a mark out of 25. So who cares, right? Well, you know what? These are stupid lost marks that add up in the end, right? Anyways, so you got your sketch going, and from the sketch, we start building our app. And what we do is we create this, we start almost listing down all the object properties, how we've modified our objects. So if someone, let's say tomorrow, was to take on your document, they could recreate your project, so to speak, from a forms perspective, right? That's what they would do. So I could look at this, and if I have a label 1, what is it? A label 1 is a terrible name, but it would be, the text property is going to change to book sales, right? My font is going to be bold 12, and so on, right? These are all the different changes that I'm going to make to each of the properties of my form. Okay, questions there? Good. And then we go to these more objects, right? And I'm not going to go through there. We kind of get to this event procedures or event handlers, if you will, the methods that are part of my class, my form class. So I'm here. I've kind of we put down 4 different methods. So we've got our print button click event handler, right? Our calculate button click event handler, our clear button click event handler, and our exit button click event handler. I'm saying that over and over again because if you notice, each of these event handlers are generated automatically by C#. So clickety click, and all of a sudden the event handler is generated, right? The name is generated and the association is generated for that event handler, okay? And then in here we've got some, I'm going to say pseudocode, okay? Now I know some of you were at the break we were talking, and some of you may be talking in pseudocode all the time, right? Now, some of you that's the way you are, right? That's fine. Especially when you wake up in the morning and you're going through your boot sequence. That's fine, right? But here what I'm asking for specifically is what your methods are going to do at a high level, okay? Talk about your stuff. I don't want code here. This isn't code. This is just, like it says here, set the print action to preview. Print the form. That's what these 2 things do. And it's almost they represent 2 lines of code for our print button click event handler, right? And the same thing for our calculate button click event handler. It has the declare the variables. We have to talk about that. Convert the input quantity and price to numeric, right? We know we need to use a conversion method there, and so on, right? So these are our event procedures. Then we actually come up with a final form. This final form, again, is part of your assignment requirements. So what is this? It's a screen capture, right? You do a screen capture of your form, and I don't want, I'm being specific here, I do not want a screen capture of your entire screen. Please don't do that, okay? Here's a way I can do it on the Mac. On the Mac, it's a little different, but I will show you it's kind of the same whether you do it here on the Mac or on the PC. I do a screen capture, right? So on the Mac, it's Command-Shift, let's say 4, right? Right, all print screen. If I press spacebar on the Mac, I can take a picture of the whole form. It makes that weird sound, like a camera sound, which you can't hear because it's inside my Army Bluetooth mic, right? And when I go back here on my desktop, I have a screenshot. Okay, let me show you what a screenshot looks like of the entire screen, so people are very clear of what I want, right? And you guys know what I'm going to do anyway, but this is it, and it's useless. I don't want this big screen here. Maybe all I want is this little form. So what am I going to do? In my graphics program, and this I'm using Fireworks here, right? I'm going to zoom in, right? I'm going to zoom in. There's different ways of doing that. So here it is. I'm zooming in to where I want it. Whoop. And now I'm going to crop it out. So please do that with your form, right? My expectation is you go through and you only care about the information you want. Be, as precise as you can be. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect because you guys aren't graphic artists, and neither am I, right? But let's say, for example, I get the borders of the form. I double-click on my application, and here it is. Here's my ugly screen capture of my form. Now, in this particular case, my form wasn't running. I would ask you to take a shot of this when your application is actually on the go, right? So when your application is running, take a screenshot. Let me know what it looks like. If your application in the future assignments has multiple forms, I would need multiple sketches and multiple screenshots, one for each form. Make sense? So right now, you only have a single form application. You don't have a multiple form application. It's not going from one form to the other and shutting one down and opening up another one. You're not doing that. You're just doing a single form, so that's why there's only a requirement for one sketch. Okay. Let me shut this down. So really, again, I'm just using Fireworks because that's what I feel comfortable with, but it doesn't mean that you have to use Fireworks for your editing software. You can use whatever you want, whatever makes sense. If you want to use Paint on Windows, you can use Paint, all right, to do your modification, your cropping. And, Paint these days has come a long way from the beginnings, but we won't go there. Huh? You could. You could do it. Oh, there's so much you could do, right? So, there's a lot of power that we've given some of our tools these days. Okay, anyone clear before we move on to handling exceptions? Is anyone, has a problem, with understanding those instructions? Because I'm going to start going into the design details a little bit more when we create our form together. All right, so let's go back into the form a little bit. So here I've kind of followed my instructions, and if I go back to PowerPoint here and I go back up to some of my requirements, I'm going to go check all of them with you. I know it's going to be tedious, and I know you're not going to love me for it, but it is what it is. Yeah.
I know you mentioned this before, but
yes.
So basically, when we're doing our assignments, what you have there is just the basics of what you want us to do, and then we can go and basically add whatever we want.
Are you saying you can make it sexier?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I'll use that word for you. You can make it sexier. You can make your assignment look awesome. You can choose your own background. You're going to have a logo. You can do all kinds of stuff to make it yours. And at the end of the day, it really should be something like that because you're going to be carrying that forward to other classes, like, for example, your web programming class, right? Create an external document and then use it across all your classes. Some people won't require it. I'm thinking that the other people that have advanced web programming with Carmen would also require to do an external document. It's going to be the same kind of thing, okay? So whether you're doing it with me or whether with Carmen, you might as well create something that's similar or common that you're going to use across both assignments or both classes. All right, so let's take a look at some of this stuff. we have our objects and properties, and I've got an instruction from the client to put this form together. So again, I showed you where my book sale form, the actual form itself, my labels, my group boxes. Right now, my group box is group box 1. What's the problem with doing that? I mean, okay, here's my group box. I can actually highlight the group box. Yeah.
It's unclear when you're looking at the code and stuff like that what exactly you do.
Yeah, you're right. And the thing is, if you name the group box, even people say, well, you don't need the group box, why name it? You don't need a label, it's not important, why name it? I don't agree with giving a label a generic name like label 1. Please don't do that with your assignments, even though it says it here in our documentation and so on. My recommendation to you, and not just for now, but for the future, when you do your UIs, you create your UIs, give each of your UIs some kind of, contextual name for each of the forms. Even if it's something like, if I'm creating a label like quantity, right? So here's my quantity label here. This label should not be called, or not be labeled, label 7, right? This label should be called quantity label, right? And the reason for that is so I know whether my quantity label is turned off or on. Remember, you can control stuff inside from a code perspective, right? So if I name something that's contextual, all my labels, all my controls, I can do things with them. For example, enable them and disable them. I know where they are. Some of you may say, well, this is very common sense, Tom. Of course I would do this. Others of you would say, well, but on your documentation it says there's label 1 and there's group box 1 and so on. I know it is. This is what again, we're getting this from our original textbook that we had. But my recommendation to you is, please, I would ask that you make all your controls and all of your variables contextual. So that's the first thing I would change if I was going to do this thing. Also, the group box. Group box is really cool because everything in the group box you can control. I can change the color of the background of the group box. I could turn the group box off and on, and sometimes you may need to do that. Like for additional interactivity and a better user experience, sometimes what you need to do is you may want to turn or hide a group box until another set of group boxes is available. Like let's say you need answer A to be answered before you give them the option to show them the other group boxes. You could disable them. You could also make them invisible, depending on what the user experience you want to deliver. Okay? So that's why I'm suggesting to you all of the names of your form are contextual. Also, we have this funny little thing down here, and some of you asked, again, through email, you did this print form, and I know you explained it, but I don't understand. Why are you dragging this thing, from what it says, Visual Basic Power Packs? Visual Basic Power Packs are just a group of common Visual Studio actual components that you can use. They're very simple components. You can get there's much nicer ones that exist for Visual Studio. But this one has something called print form, and the print form allows us to use a set of libraries that can print things out, and that's why we're using that. That's the only thing we're using from Visual Basic Power Packs. And all we need to do is either double-click this print form for that requirement on your assignment, or drag and drop that somewhere on your form, and it'll form this additional library pointer, if you will, down here, right? That tells you that this print form 1 is associated with your document. Okay. Print form 1 is the basic name. Again, what I would recommend to you is you change the name from print form 1 to something more contextual. Okay, print form, my print form, whatever you want to call it, something else, right? And typically the print action is done here. Now, right now, the default for your print form is print to printer, right? You could change it here, and you could make this print to preview. So instead of actually physically programming it in your code view, you could do it here on the design view. But my recommendation to you is, you want more control than that, and you want to make sure that your print form does stuff. If you're lazy and you did it here, there's still going to be an association somewhere inside the documentation and in your files, so it would print to preview anyway. Or if you wanted to do it, I'm just showing you how to do it programmatically during runtime, right? So if you see different things in your documentation, this is why we do that. Okay, and so that's one thing that we've answered. So again, group boxes and so on. If I want to get to you, for you guys who haven't practiced, you've been watching me, but you haven't practiced your Visual Studio, I feel sorry for you. You're going to have trouble in your exam, I'm telling you. If you don't get to it right now, you think it's easy. And it is, but it just takes time, and it takes trial and error to do things properly if you don't know how. If I double-click on this print form, again, it takes me to the pre-made event handler print button click as an example, and it has two arguments: our sender argument and our event args, or our E argument. You need to have those two things in order for the event to fire and to be listened to properly. And here's our print button. This is what I'm telling you. We define our print action, and the way we do it is through IntelliSense. Okay? Because there's no way I could remember system.drawing.printing.print action as and then print to preview, this long set of accessors that access the exact method inside the system namespace that I'm accessing. Right? There's no way I would remember. Okay? And nor do I expect you to. So that's how we do it. Again, if you notice, I've got a little bit of comments here at the top of my code. From an assignment perspective, you should have more. All right? There should be like, what does this print button click do? This is just print the form. What you probably want in here is something like print button prints the form, right? I'm also using, I've also specified print to preview instead of as a print action as opposed to print to printer, right? Any changes you make should be reflected in your documentation, right? And now you may think this is quite verbose. Yes, it is, right? But depending on the company you're going to be going to for co-op, or in the future when you work in real life and you're working within C#, and it could be the banks. Banks are big on C#, right? They might ask you to put a whole header in here for each of your event procedures or event handlers that has a specific format. I haven't asked for a specific format, but I do require that you talk about what the actual method does, the event procedure or event handler, what it does, what it's for, and I don't need a line by line retelling of what it is, like a pseudocode, but I need to understand if you're doing something to work around a problem, that I've given you. So here's my problem. I've given you a problem. How you do it, and this is your methodology. And if you have to document it because you need to understand what it does, then that's fine. We're going to get to try catch in a second. So here's my calculate button. I can double click on calculate, and it takes me to my calculate button. But what if where is all this stuff? And we're going to kind of hit this next lesson. How does it know to create this a stub procedure through Visual Studio when I double click in my design view? Well, if you go to the right hand side here in properties, there's a bunch of these little buttons that are activated. If you hit this button here, events, right? And it tells you the click event, what it's pointing to from a procedure perspective. So right now it's pointing at this calculate button.click procedure. You could make it point somewhere else. And we're going to get into that with next lesson when it comes to event handler, how one event handler can be used to share. Or we read it once, and then we use if statements to kind of react to something that happens with only one event handler. So almost like a shared event handler that we're going to use, as opposed to writing one for each one. And when you do that before you click the button, before you double click. Otherwise, it'll create its own association with another one, right? This way, you can double click on it. It'll associate the event handler with one that's already been written. For example, let's say I've written this one for my calculate button, right? And I want I make another button called calculate 2 or something like that to use a part of or exactly the same event procedure. Or maybe I have an exit button and I also have another kind of exit menu, right? And the exit menu is going to use my same procedure that I'm not going to write exit twice. Why would I do that, right? So this is the way to do that, and you specify that here under the events. We'll talk about that in more detail next week and as the weeks go. But that's how we do it when we get to when we double click. That's why it creates that stuff. Okay. So if we go back to PowerPoint, it's asked us for these properties, and we haven't done any coding yet. That doesn't happen here in the properties. That just allows us to put the form together, how this thing looks. So this is this is what we're doing. We're following going through each of the properties here, whatever it's telling us to do, and we're putting it in. And my recommendation to you is if you change anything here within your when you create your assignment number 1, you document it in your document. That's all you're doing. You create this table, and you go, this type of control, this property is changed to this. That's what I've done. So you're telling me what you've done to make your application look and work the way it does. Okay. When I go to the next part, my pseudocode, it says I've already kind of done this, and as you can see, there's 2 lines, and we've already kind of looked at the print button click, set the print action to preview. We've done that, and print the form. My calculate button has a little bit more. We declare the variables. We convert the input. We know how to do that. We calculate extended price because it's quantity times price. And we calculate in round, this discount is equal to extended price times and the discount itself, right? And calculate discount price is equal to extended price minus discount. So all these things we're trying to do. So let's take a look at how that looks when we translate it. And by the way, that pseudocode sucks. There's way better ways of writing that. Nice, much nicer. And I recommend that you take your time writing it right. Okay? So here we have some basic variables that we kind of set up in the beginning of our calculate button. These are local variables, a quantity integer, and if just from a Visual Studio perspective, if I click on the variable, as you notice, and maybe it's hard to see here up on the screen, but if I click on the variable, if you look at the video, it'll show it. It highlights all the variables that are local within that local namespace that have the same name. So I've highlighted quantity integer. All the other quantity integers are highlighted, so I know where I'm using them. So they're here, here, and here. Also, if I hover over an integer or some kind of variable, and I'm just going to make the screen a little bit, just change the size of it so you guys can see a little better. If I hover over it, it actually tells me, from a Visual Studio perspective, it'll tell me what the variable is. So it says local variable, an integer, and it's quantity integer. So I know what type of variable I'm hovering over. And this is going to be key when we create our debugging. When we go to next lesson, we start doing some debugging. I'm going to show you guys how to do that a little bit better. Okay, so again, we've kind of done that. We've calculated our values, and we do it in this try-catch block. Why do we need error handling at all? Who cares? Why do we really need this try-catch block? We know it's going to work, right? Anybody? Why do I use error handling? I know it's kind of a silly question, but what the hell? Yeah, I'll go to 8%. How many times is an application that you use in Windows shut down due to an uncontrolled exception error? Huh? Too many. But yet, we have all these try-catch and different kinds of exceptions. Why does it still happen? Why is it still happening in Windows when we have a program and it still shuts down? Why is that? Do you know? Because the programmer hasn't programmed it well enough to catch all the exceptions. And he hasn't done enough testing. A lot of this comes from doing heavy-duty testing and trying to test in different environments to cause these exceptions. Sometimes, right, you can create exception codes, and a lot of your programs will do that. They'll send out a little exception code saying error 13578, and it's because of this, right? Well, that error is not just random. Someone's used that and documented what that error means, right? And it could be something where it's uncontrollable by the programmer. The programmer cannot control that exception because it's a system exception. It's an exception based on your hardware configuration, or it could be something else that they can't control. The only thing we can put in here are things we can control, right? There's going to be exceptions we can't control that are going to be generated, and we have to just deal with that error. Now, if the program just craps out, that's bad, right? So we want to try and avoid that eventuality by using some kind of error handling. This is the basic error handling, as basic as you can get. Okay, you've got your try keyword, and inside this code block, and if you notice, if I'm scrolling up again, you've got this brace here, indicating the code block start. And this, if you notice, and again, I don't know if you can see this on the screen, but on my screen, you can see that if I highlight one code brace, the other one highlights as well. The one that's ended. The nice thing to do here, and I'm going to show you as we go, is actually document that this is the end of a try. So I would do something like this in real life. You know, end try. Why would I do this? Why does it matter? Yes?
Because there's a lot of curly braces through the code, and it just makes it easier to see
Lots of curly braces, and you know what? I don't know which curly brace this is associated with. Is there a bad thing about this? Some people don't like it. Some people are like, oh, I hate when someone puts the end try and end if and then this and then that. I don't think there's anything bad about it. It's just all it is it's just, yeah?
I was just going to say, coming from experience of working with very large programs that have a lot of nested loops, and they didn't have that.
Oof.
It was very, and they also didn't indent at the same time.
Yeah, that's bad. That's bad. If you don't format your code properly, it's bad.
You're just going like, I don't even know what bracket is
Right. It's hard to look at somebody else's code. The answer is this, right? Hard to look at someone else's code, someone's written, and understand what each of these braces are. And that's a problem, one of our problems with C#. That was taken care of with VB with this, and they actually had end try, right, in VB, right? Whereas in C# they don't have that. They have the curly brace that ends. It's the same thing when we do programming for HTML, whether we're doing it for different, we're using braces in JavaScript. We're using braces for XML. We're using braces for different kinds of programs. I would recommend highly that you take that, kind of push this forward into your coding style, and put some kind of comment that says end try. Some people go as far as saying things like end, for the type of event handler. Like here's your event handler here, and it's called calculate button click. They go down to the bottom of that, brace, and they say end, calculate button click. Why? Because sometimes we get them confused, and we can't figure out, where these buttons are. And I recommend when you start writing your code, you start putting that stuff into your code as you go, so that way it's done. So you know what these braces are. Otherwise, it'll be confusing when it comes to a much larger piece of code. Okay, so you've got this try statement, and then inside the try statement, we're going to go into it in a few minutes. But inside this try statement, and I'm just going to go up to here for a second, or this catch statement. Here's our catch. So here's our end catch, right? The try statement says try to make this code run. That's the high-level way of thinking about it. The code in this block, try and make it go. Okay, program. And if you can make this go, great. Don't worry about the catch, right? But if you can't make it go, and there's an error that's generated, catch the error, deal with it, right? And we're in this particular case, I'm using a message box to deal with that error, right? So deal with, throw out a message box. If this program is going to throw an exception, right? We're going to catch the exception. That's what it's called, right? And then when we catch the exception, we have to deal with this exception. Okay. So that's what we've done here. Let's go back, and then we have clear sale, and let's go back to clear sale. What am I doing here? I'm doing a bunch of clears. Clear, 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 clear. So I'm clearing the text box. I'm clearing the price text box. I'm clearing the extended price text box, and so on. And I'm shifting the focus back up to my quantity text box. So I shift the input for my user back up because I want to reset the form. That's what I'm doing here. This is a very common way of doing it. It's also very ugly, right? Look at clear, 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 clear. Lots of clearing, right? But can you think of a better way to do this? Right? Yeah.
Put all that into another code, into another function, and then just call that function wherever you need to do that.
Well, and then in some ways, that's what we're doing here with our clear button click. But what we can do is what you just said, we can make this clear button click, this event handler. We can call this event handler from other places, and we're going to be able to learn how to do that next lesson. Okay. So, because we don't want to reuse this. We don't want to keep doing this over and over again, right? And we're going to need to do this sometimes, as an example in different parts of our assignments as we go forward. Okay. And then the exit. So here's our exit button. Like I said, it's this.close that does it, right? We document even this. Exit the project, right? And again, if I was going to do it right, if I was documenting this properly, because I have a lot of these event handlers, I would put in something like, end exit button, if I can type. If you're lazy, just highlight and cut and paste or copy and paste. And the reason why we do that is so we know this is our project. This is where it the end of our exit button click, right? So we know it's when I go to the next one, and if I forget, somehow I've wiped out this brace as an example, and if I have a consistent coding style like this, and I'm missing that brace, I'll know because I'm like, hey, where's that end exit button click? I missed it. It's not there, right? So I have to put it in. Somehow I've wiped it out through my, a finger pointing, a finger issue is what we call, right? A typo. Okay, so that's really this in a nutshell. Again, the other thing you want to notice is when it runs, I've made all my forms start in the middle of the screen because that's what I like. You can control where on the screen your form pops up, and there's going to be in runtime mode when you're in Visual Studio, as you'll notice, you'll see that it pops up with different kinds of windows that you can access. So for example, if I click on my autos window while I'm accessing the form, I can do that, and it'll give different variables that I'm looking for, my locals. When it comes to break time, when I'm using debugging, it actually can display values of different variables here, and we're going to talk about that in debugging the project next lesson. If I want to stop the project even though I've lost it, I can click on it down here. This is the window that tells me that that project is running, or I can just simply click stop, and it'll put me back into design time. All right. Any questions around this? So that's how I translated my requirements that I've been given, right? And I've created the necessary documentation for my particular project here. But you are not given, your sketches and everything else. You've got to make your sketches. You've got to document the changes you've made to your properties, and you've got to create the screenshot for your assignment number 1 in order for you to have that, your documentation be more complete. Okay. Yes, I know it's tedious. Okay, we're going to move to the next part. So let's do some more detail on exception handling. So again, we have exception handling goes kind of hand in hand with input validation, right? Well, what's the difference? What is the difference between, some people have a problem with input validation. They don't know what the difference is in error handling. They have a problem with this, right? I don't know why, but they have this thing. I don't understand what you mean when you say error handling. Is it the same, Tom, as input validation? And the answer is they're very different. They're very different. Input validation helps us reduce errors, right? It helps us stop errors altogether from when we start inputting things, when we allow users to input stuff in our code, all right? As an example. We stop, oh, this is going to be recorded forever too. Lovely. We stop the errors from happening with input validation. Error handling happens when we know there's a potential for the user, no matter how much input validation we do, to create an error, right? That the program does not want, we don't want the program to calculate something, or we don't want the program to crap out. We want to handle the error and go back and let the user enter it again, because it provides a better user experience. Okay, so again, often it's called error trapping or error handling. You might hear it in different ways. Okay, so here's some examples again. So we've got our try, with statements that may cause the error, and our catch. We look at the exception type. This is our general form, and we put in a variable name for the exception type. We cast the variable in that different exception, and we can actually print out the error that we're getting in our message box. That's what we can do, and we do that here. And we also have something called finally, right? And then finally is something that always executes, whether you have an error or not. Okay, there's some reasons why we would have such a thing, because sometimes we want certain options to become available to us when we're doing error handling. Typically, you won't see finally too much in my code. You might see a try catch. Finally means it's always going to happen. No matter what happens, that code is going to run. Okay. Finally might be some place where we do some manual garbage collection. Finally, it might be some place where we do our manually shutting down our any kind of open streams. We do file manipulation, or closing down our database connection. That's what we would do finally, right? Because we always want that to happen. We always want to close off when we encounter an error. Maybe that's where we want to do that kind of stuff, okay? And other kinds of things that make sense. So here's an example. This catch, because we're not saying we're not specifying what kind of error it's going to catch. It's going to catch every error, right? And we're going to basically say it's an error, right? And we're going to actually output it in this message label .text. We're going to say, hey, there's an error in your input data, right? We're not going to stop the error from happening. All this is saying, we're just reporting that there's an error, okay? And by the way, when we do this try catch, it's almost like an if statement in some ways. We're saying, if there are no errors, do this block, right? If there are errors, don't do this block and do this, right? Do the catch, right? So if there are errors, well, my quantity integer and all these calculations I'm asking it to do will not happen. You won't have it happen because it's going to generate an error. The first place it generates the error, right, it'll stop working and it'll shift to the catch, right? So here we go, and let's say, for example, we're trying to parse this quantity text box.text and convert it to an integer, except they've entered in a number like, or a letter like an R or a B or something by accident. They mistyped. Yeah.
With respect to try catches, is it more optimal to use if statements and try to like count for the type of data that is coming in?
That's validation, right? We're talking about error handling. You use both, right? Validation, remember we talked about that. You're doing validation. You're validating the type of data. If it's this, then spit out this. If it's this, then it's kind of the same thing. But this is where you're getting an error because the user has done something you haven't, created a structure for, right? Which is going to happen, right? Unless you're really awesome at doing testing. And by the way, we could do a whole class on testing. Yeah, it's crazy. Like how long? The whole course could be just debugging, right? But we're not going to go there. That's really tedious and ugly, and I hate it, right? Actually, that's the part of for me, is the worst part. And you know what? And I know it's kind of an aside that's going to be recorded here, but back in the day when I was doing it, right, we had to create test cases for every piece of our assignments, right? So here's our test case. We'd have to put that input data and create a test case and prove that the input data that I'm getting automatically from my test case is working. And create the errors. Here's 5 different things I can create. I know these are errors. I want to show these errors. I want to create the test cases that create the errors. Like that's the kind of stuff. And also test how my program functions, how fast it goes, to the millisecond, right? And all that kind of stuff. Nowadays, we don't have to do that because we don't care so much because our computer is so powerful. No, we don't care about memory leaks except for now we're almost, this is where I go back to old school programming. You don't care about memory leaks until until you hit a mobile device. And now you care about memory leaks again, right? And it's going to change again. One day we're not going to care about it because our devices are going to be crazy big in terms of memory and power. Like right now, like I said, we just talked about the iPhone, the new iPhone being 64-bit architecture, right? That's like seriously having a real computer in your pocket, right? Crazy computer. And it's not just for the iPhone. There's been quad-core processors out there in other phones for a while, right? It's a big thing now. So, it might not be an issue come the future. But for now, memory handling and garbage collection, especially on portable devices, is still an issue we have to think about. Okay, so try catch. Here's where we catch a specific exception. We want to try and catch a format exception, right? So it's a formatting issue, right? And we want to kind of add the formatting issue. We want to concatenate that to the message label. So we say, here's my error and input, and this is the type of error I'm getting. Okay, I'm concatenating it onto the message label that I'm printing out here, or that I'm displaying. And here are different error exceptions you can have. There's a format exception, an invalid cast exception, and so on. You can test for all these and others, and if you don't know what exception it's going to be, there might be an exception. It's a very safe practice to put in exception, at the very least. If you know you're doing some kind of calculations, you're getting some kind of input from the user, and there's going to be some calculations based on his input, surround it with the try-catch and use the generic exception, worst case, so your program doesn't crap out. Okay? And there are other ones for handling multiple exceptions. All right, so for example, let's say I know that I'm going to have different pieces of my code. Might create a formatting exception or an arithmetic exception, and maybe, some other kinds of exceptions from a different piece of code. You can use almost like these catches, the same try block, but different catches, as an example. You can also nest them if you want to go that detailed as well. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with creating that structure so you catch all the exceptions and respond back to the user what the problem was. Okay, we're going to just pause here, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a